It's always nice to hear from someone that you haven't talked to in a while. Maybe you get a casual text from an old friend out of nowhere, and it's a little weird for them to just reach out after so long, but it's nothing alarming, especially since all that's said is something like, "Hey, I've been busy. I hope you're doing well." But then you find out that friend died 3 years ago. It's not science fiction. It's not a horror movie. It happens more often than you'd think. A mother in Canada lost her son in an accident only to start receiving text messages from his phone weeks later. This mother, she gets a call from the hospital. They say her oldest son, he's 43, was admitted, and it's not looking good. He's not going to make it. And she drives 4 hours to be by his side. He'd struggled with addiction, and she thought that his body was finally succumbing to the complications from years of substances. She was overcome with grief. She's trying to figure out what to do next, even planned his funeral and decided to donate his organs. It was awful. But then she gets this really confusing text message from a number that she didn't recognize, and the person was claiming they were her son and asking for money.
So like a text scam. I mean, how'd she know it was him?
Well, she didn't actually know it was him. She wasn't sure, but it was really disturbing. I mean, how could this be her son? The one that she just saw lying in this hospital bed? But this wasn't new. Her son actually used to text her from all kinds of numbers all the time. She tells her husband, and he says, you know what? It's probably a sick joke. Or, like you said, maybe it's a scam, someone that's feeding off another person's pain. So she pushed it aside. And days later, there's another one. It's from the same number, and she'd had enough. She wanted to scream at this person to stop torturing her, stop prank texting. So she called the number back, and she was shocked when she heard her son's voice on the other end.
It was probably AI, like someone cloning your voice and then calling.
I would think that too nowadays, but no, although that is scary and it is something that's happening, this really was her son. And her first thought was, oh my God, his funeral is tomorrow. It was confusing, it was scary, and in the end, it was actually negligence. It wasn't AI, it wasn't a scam, it was a mix-up in the hospital. They accidentally misidentified this patient as her son. So it actually wasn't. Can you imagine?
Wow, so her son didn't die.
No, they contacted the wrong next of kin. The digital afterlife is actually a real thing. And this isn't an isolated incident. There's an entire Reddit thread dedicated to sharing stories just like this one, even ones with more ghostly aspects to them. One Redditor named Sarah posted saying that less than a week after her mom passed away, she was driving and her cell phone rang and she looked down and it said, "Mom." It was a call from her mom's cell phone programmed into Sarah's contacts. She stared at it for a second thinking, okay, maybe it's her dad or sister. They had her mother's phone. So she picked it up and she said hello. There was only silence and kind of crackly static for 3 minutes before the call just ended. Sarah said she listened with her heart pounding out of her chest the entire time, but she never heard her mother's voice. No one could ever explain it.
I wonder if someone new had her number. Maybe it got recycled and maybe it was still saved on her phone, because that actually happened to me once. I was texting an old friend and I had a whole conversation with this random stranger before they told me, no, this isn't your friend.
Oh my gosh. Well, they didn't say that, but it can definitely be possible. The technology, the digital world that we live in, it parallels our real life. It's an extension of who we are. So if we post something as us, it's us. But you never know who is behind the screen, right? Who's behind the keyboard or the phone number. As long as it's our profile or yours, it's essentially us to the outside world. Case in point, there was an Instagram account belonging to a missing girl that kept posting new updates months after she was last seen. It was concerning, and these kind of situations can hinder investigations. It turned out the account had been hacked, and the hacker was posting as this missing girl, but sadly, she was actually still missing. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 48 of the Darklivity podcast. I'm your host, Kimbyrleigha, and I'm here with my husband, whose anniversary of the day we actually officially became boyfriend and girlfriend is this month, Jonathan.
Hi. Darklivity is the dark downward slope into the degradation of the human mind and the consequences that such darkness brings to light.
I want to thank you for anyone who's purchased some of our merch, and we will bring you full size, not crop top, but full size hoodies because you have asked for them. They're coming.
So grab some merch today before it goes away.
But one of the creepiest cases, a man vanished. He went missing, and then messages started coming in from him to his friends on Facebook, telling them that he was fine and he didn't want to be contacted. It actually started back on November 9th of 2015. A Florida man named Michael Shaver resigned from his job via text. So out of the blue, he just texted his coworker, letting them know he wasn't coming back and not to contact him.
Who quits their job like that?
Right. And this wasn't just any job. It was a prestigious role as a mechanical technician at Epcot Center in Walt Disney World. Plus, Michael loved his job, and he was actually in line for promotion. He never showed up again. His boss texted him a few days later on November 12th, asking him, "What's going on?" Michael's response, "I'm in Georgia. Fire me or assume I quit." But here's the thing. Michael's truck was still in his driveway. His clothes, tools, his wallet, everything was still at his house. And then he starts unfriending all of his friends on Facebook, even his best friend. It's like he had decided to cut everyone off and go off the grid. Everyone was so confused, especially his family. Where was Michael Shaver?
But in order to figure that out, we have to go back in time and tell you who Michael really was.
But before we do, I want to take a minute to introduce you to today's sponsor. Imagine this. Your mom's beloved cafe has burned to the ground under mysterious circumstances, and now it's up to you to rebuild it from the ashes and uncover the truth behind the fire. As you bake delicious treats, serve customers, and design the cafe of your dreams, an unexpected twist appears. Your high school sweetheart is back, stirring up old feelings and adding a dash of romance to all of the drama. Well, that's the story behind Love and Pies, the sponsor of today's video. Love and Pies is a heartwarming casual mobile game that's free to download on mobile devices for Android and iOS. It blends relaxation, creativity, and a captivating narrative. With over 10 million downloads worldwide, it's a favorite for a lot of people, and it's become one of my go-to escapes. It's the perfect way to unwind after a long day of researching and editing, whether I'm just playing a quick session on the couch or cozying up with some tea for a longer play. It's perfect to get my mind off of the heavier topics.
What makes Love and Pie special is that you merge and match ingredients to craft mouth-watering desserts. Customize and decorate your cafe to match your unique style and solve mysteries and uncover the secrets of Appleton. The game also includes stunning visuals and top-tier animations, which really makes it come alive.
And right now, Appleton's very own heartthrob Miguel is back for the premiere of his latest action-packed movie, and you can help turn the town into the ultimate filming location for the mysteries of Miguel, dangers, and dandelions, and unlock brand new themed decorations and event-exclusive rewards as you take on fun new challenges and roll out the red carpet. That's personally my favorite part. I like all the limited edition and holiday-related events.
So download Love and Pies today using our special link below or scan the QR code on the screen. And as a special bonus, you'll receive a free in-game gift bundle.
And a huge thank you to Love and Pies for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's get back to the case.
Michael Shaver was born on January 14th, 1982 in upstate New York to Sharon and Doug Shaver. He grew up in a small town of Lawrence near the Canadian border. It's a quiet place where life moved at a slower pace. The Shaver family had 4 children, and Michael was the third, with 2 sisters and a brother. Their mother, Sharon, eventually became a single mom, and Michael's older sister, Stacy, took on the role of an extra caregiver, especially for Michael. This created a strong bond between them. Michael was also very close with his brother, Brian. The two shared a special connection.
Michael had a deep fascination with how things worked. He loved tinkering, and as a matter of fact, his father believed that the trade actually ran in their family. His father, Doug, loved working with his hands, and he would work on projects with Michael, and soon he showed a natural curiosity and an engineer's mindset. He was always taking things apart and putting them back together, and he was eager to understand how they worked, whether it was a broken toy, a malfunctioning radio, or a household appliance. Michael quickly became the go-to fixer for his friends, family, and even their neighbors. His mind was built for machines, engines, and flight, and his dream was to work in aviation. But back when he was just a kid, he did what other kids his age were doing, riding their bikes around the neighborhood and going on mini adventures. But he didn't do it alone. Michael's best friend, Scott Amatuccio, was a constant presence in his life. They met when they were just kids and they did everything together.
Scott could tell from the start that Michael was naturally curious and inventive. They both loved music, so Mike built a drum set out of plastic containers, and over time, he got really good at playing, and the two of them even started a band called Rifles and Dandelions. It was their own take on Guns N' Roses. Later, Michael taught himself to play guitar and would even film himself in the mirror with a home camera. He was outgoing, funny, and a very loyal friend.
Their friendship remained strong throughout the years, with Scott playing a major role in some of Michael's most significant life moments. For example, Michael's first crush in middle school, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl named Lori Paddleford. She was his exact same age, born on October 30th of 1982. It was love at first sight, the moment when Michael sat right next to Lori in class. It wasn't until they were attending Lawrence Central High School a few years later that Michael had a little help from Scott and his other friends, and they planned a way for him to ask her out. They brought a portable boombox to school, and they played Boys to Men, that song, I'll Make Love to You, in the hallway as Lori walked out of class. I can just imagine that, like the boombox, high school love. And Michael went right up to her and asked her to be his girlfriend, and the rest is history. You know those couples that meet young and it just sticks? Like there's no big dramatic love story, no breakups and makeups, just two people who find each other and they just never let go. That was Michael and Lori. She was confident, social, the type of girl who had no problem speaking her mind. And Michael, he was more reserved, kind of quiet, more like the stand back and observe type of person. But somehow it just worked out. By high school, they were inseparable, the kind of couple that you would look at and think they're going to get married. And sure enough, they did. They had a gorgeous wedding with Scott by Michael's side as his best man, and Lori was the happiest anyone had ever seen her. They were so in love. Michael couldn't stop smiling the entire time.
And Michael eventually worked his way into aviation, starting as a mechanic before earning his commercial pilot's license. He absolutely loved flying and would often take his friends up for rides. It wasn't just a job for him, it was his passion. And later, Michael and Lori followed Scott to Florida and bought a house on 5 acres of land in the rural area of Claremont. It was a 4-bedroom, 3-bath manufactured home at 9850 Sandy Pines Road.
It was nice. It had a fireplace, a full kitchen, and lots of land, which was the best part. Plus, it was pretty private. The property backed up to a conservation, and there were no rear neighbors. Lori and Michael both loved animals, and this home had a horse barn, 4 pastures, and it was also fenced in. The front yard was huge as well, and there were neighbors in that area, so they weren't exactly alone out there. They still had a little bit of a sense of community, but all that for under $200,000. That was a steal.
I'd say so. But after a while, Michael's job kept him away from home too much, so he decided to quit flying. Instead, he started working as a mechanical engineer for precious metals. They're a local flight team that participated in airplane races.
I'd never heard of airplane races before, but I'd seen things like the Blue Angels, and that kind of reminded me of this.
A lot of people say it's kind of like NASCAR of the skies.
Oh, that's pretty exciting. Michael loved it. He loved being a part of the aviation community, and those who worked with him actually called him a genius, and his friends agreed.
But this job ended up being just as hectic, and Michael often found himself away from home for days at a time. And meanwhile, Lori was working from home as an insurance agent. Realizing he needed a change, Michael decided to move on, and eventually he landed his dream job. With his technical expertise and determination, Michael's natural talents led him to a prestigious role as a mechanical technician at Epcot Center in Walt Disney World. Now he was working behind the scenes at one of the most famous theme parks in the world.
And I read that he was actually working on the monorail system, among other things. And of course, that is an iconic aspect of the park. Lori and Michael were fulfilling their dream of a peaceful rural life together, and they were now a family of 4, with their 2 children, Isabel and Aiden. They began raising birds for profit and sold the meat to local restaurants. They filled the land with quail, chickens, turkeys, ducks, horses, and other farm animals, embracing a lifestyle centered around family and nature. Always eager to make Lori happy, Michael even began digging a pond for her ducks. A quiet, simple life, a family, a home. Everything was falling into place. But then Michael vanished.
So let's flash forward to November 2015. Michael and Lori were both 33. Isabel was about 7 and Aiden was around 5. Michael had a passion for antique malls and tools, and on Saturday, November 7th, two of his favorite things came together at an antique tractor show. Excited to share the experience, he brought Lori and the kids along. They met up with his Epcot coworker Frank Merritt and Frank's family for a fun day together, and they were having a great time until out of the blue, Michael walked up to Frank and said, "I gotta go." He apologized and told Frank they'd talk more about it at work on Monday, and he left.
But Monday came around and Michael never showed up to work. Actually, back on Sunday, November 8th, Frank tried texting Michael, just reaching out to catch up after he left so abruptly. But Michael never responded. Frank just figured, you know what, he's probably just busy. But when Michael was a no-show at his job, Frank thought that was really unlike him. So he texted him again, asking if everything was okay. His response was unsettling. He said he was quitting his job and not to contact him again, just like that. No explanation. Michael had always been dedicated to his work, and he was even in line for a promotion to a foreman. Quitting out of nowhere just didn't make any sense. Frank assumed Michael was just being dramatic and maybe he needed some time to cool off. But Michael didn't show up the next day, on Tuesday or even on Wednesday. And that was a problem. He never missed work without calling in. And at that point, his boss, John Borglum, finally texted him to find out where he was and what was going on.
And this is when things got even weirder. Michael's response was abrupt. He said he was moving to Georgia and had no plans to return. He told his boss to either fire him or assume that he had quit. It was completely out of character for Michael. And he was a devoted worker, someone who never made impulsive career decisions. Suddenly cutting off contact and disappearing from his job just didn't make sense. Something was absolutely not right. Frank decided to drive out to Michael's house to see if he could talk some sense into him. As he walked up to the front door, he glanced towards the back of the property, where he usually found Michael working on the pond for the ducks. But this time, the property was eerily quiet. Something felt off. When Lori answered the door, she wasn't welcoming. She didn't invite him inside. Instead, she seemed upset and almost defensive.
Lori explained that Michael had left them, her and the kids, and that they got into an argument over text messages that she found on his phone from another woman. And he just got into his friend Robert Mercado's black SUV and drove off. That explained why Frank saw Michael's truck still parked out in the driveway. By the next day, Michael was sending messages from his Facebook account. He sent both Frank and his boss messages making it clear that he would not be coming back to work and to please leave him alone. When Frank asked him about the expensive personal tools that Michael left behind at his workplace, he said he didn't care what they did with them. He didn't want them. He told them that they could keep them or they could even just throw them away. Now, that was alarming. This was a man who valued his tools. He worked really hard to attain them. These were actually given to him when he was in his apprenticeship with Walt Disney, and then he was able to keep them once he got hired. And later, even Robert, the man that Lori said she saw drive off with Michael, received messages as well. In short, they were similar to the ones Michael sent other people, not to contact him, and that he wanted to be left alone. It was odd because Michael made plans to spend Thanksgiving with Robert and his family. So this sudden and drastic change in communication only deepened the growing sense that something was very wrong with his friend. Robert was really shocked.
In December of 2015, just a month after Michael had supposedly left for Georgia, Lori seemed to accept that he was never coming back. She started selling off his belongings, his firearms, work tools, and even his truck. But since his truck was in Michael's name, she couldn't legally sign off on the title. So she let it get repossessed. She sold his tools for about $1,000 to the same man who had bought his firearms, a guy named Joseph Bray. Lori told Joseph that Michael was an aircraft mechanic who had moved to Georgia after losing his job. But the strange thing was, she gave different explanations about Michael's whereabouts depending on who she was talking to.
Right. If you asked Lori, she would stick to the story that Michael left, but the details would change. To some people, she said Michael moved to Georgia. To others, she said he went back to New York. And to a few more, she said he was in California starting a new life with a new family. It's like she was throwing out different stories to different people, almost catering her responses depending on who she was speaking with.
Well, did she even know if they truly weren't in touch? How would she keep tabs on him?
Well, that's what people were thinking, that she didn't know exactly where this man was or what he was doing, but there was something else. Michael's childhood friend Scott. He had this ex-fiancée named Katina Vasquez who remained friends with Lori after they broke up. And she ended up moving in with Lori and the kids to help with some of the expenses a few weeks after Michael first left for Georgia. And in the days following his disappearance, she noticed several strange things. For instance, she thought it was odd that Michael had left all of his personal belongings behind, including his clothes, his wallet, and even his toothbrush. It didn't make sense. Why would he just vanish without taking any of his essential possessions? I mean, would he just buy all new stuff?
I mean, if you wanted nothing to do with your ex and you left abruptly because you're so fed up, it could be plausible.
Sure. And Katina even became more concerned when Lori told her that she thought Michael was actually breaking into their home and stalking her. Things would be moved around, doors would be opened, and there were items that were misplaced. It was really eerie. But when Katina suggested getting a restraining order, Lori told her that law enforcement had already checked her vehicles and her phone for tracking devices and removed them, and that she really didn't want to have to face Michael in court. So she didn't think a restraining order was a good idea.
So there were tracking devices on Lori's car.
Well, that's what she said. Yes, they were removed, and now she felt, I guess, a little safer. Now, the holidays approached, which can be a very stressful time, especially if you got caught cheating and your wife and you are splitting up and you've moved somewhere else. And in this case, Michael's family and friends respected his request for space. But as time passed, they began to worry for his safety and they wanted answers. That's because the messages got more unsettling. Months had passed, the holidays were over. It was January 2016, and Michael's sister Christine received a Facebook message from him asking to tell the rest of the family to leave him alone.
In this message, Michael implied that his family had never been there for him, and he didn't want them to suddenly act like they cared. And this was both confusing and deeply alarming. None of his family members felt that they had done anything to deserve that kind of message. The accusations were completely out of character and didn't match reality. But since everyone lived in upstate New York, far from Michael, they weren't able to check on him in person. So they assumed that he just needed some space and maybe he'd come around eventually once he got his life back on track.
People do things that are very out of character when their life is falling apart. This entire time when anyone looked at Lori's Facebook, it appeared that she had moved on and she was trying to live her life, provide for her kids, and also find love again, which wasn't very hard for Lori. Right away, it seemed like she'd started dating again. First, it was a guy named Jeremy Townsend. They actually met at the local park when she was there playing with her son, and Jeremy, who she called Jay, was there with his 5-year-old son as well. And they got to talking, and then later, Lori sent him a very flirtatious DM over Facebook, and they moved the conversation to text. Eventually, they began seeing each other, and Jeremy would come over when his son was in school, and Lori's kids were as well. They would see each other maybe 1 to 3 times every week. Lori was very charismatic. She made friends easily. And when she and Jeremy were hanging out, he introduced her to a personal trainer at his gym named Rebecca. Lori immediately wanted to get toned because she felt like she'd been through so much and wanted to get back to herself, to concentrate on being her best. So she made an appointment with Rebecca, and she explained she was in a really bad relationship with her ex-husband, Michael, and he would put her down all the time. He would call her overweight even after she had his children, and it really affected her self-esteem. And she was hoping to gain a little more confidence by getting fit. Now, the two ladies ended up becoming best friends. They hung out all the time, and Lori shared intimate details with Rebecca about her life with Michael, which included things that people weren't aware of, like physical altercations, restraining orders, and even times when Michael moved out of the house. It sounded like a terrible situation, and eventually, things ended with Jeremy, which was just a casual thing anyway, and soon, a new man entered Lori's orbit, Travis Filmer. Rebecca was actually dating Travis's brother, Austin, and they were throwing a little bonfire party at Lori's in late January of that year, 2016. They invited Travis, and he and Lori just hit it off instantly. And from that point, everything was about Travis. That's all Lori talked about anytime she and Rebecca were hanging out. They didn't become a couple until May, since they were both getting out of previous relationships. But once the two best friends were dating brothers, twin brothers actually, because Travis and Austin were twins, they went on double dates and hung out all the time.
Travis was a friendly, caring guy who immediately fell in love with Lori. He always wanted kids, so he had no problem stepping in to help take care of Isabel and Aiden. The kids bonded with him the way that they would any other father figure. Eventually, Travis moved into Lori's home and gladly took the role of the new man of the house. He treated Lori well, a stark contrast to the way that she described her ex-husband, Michael. According to Lori, Michael had abandoned her and the kids, never even helping out with child support. Lori was even close with Travis's mom, Kendall Windsor, who couldn't believe that Michael would just abandon Lori to start a new life with another woman, especially without any interest in seeing or supporting his own kids. But there was one positive thing Lori shared. The divorce with Michael had been finalized. That meant she was truly free to move on and take her relationship with Travis to the next level.
But all this time, people were still wondering what Michael would think of all of this. Because didn't he care? Didn't he want some kind of connection with his own kids who are now being raised by another man? By the fall, in September of 2016, so about a year since anyone had seen Michael, his niece, Desiree Snyder, reached out to him and she sent him a Facebook message pleading for a response. When he finally did reply, he asked, "Who are you?" When she identified herself as his niece, he coldly responded that she wasn't his family because he no longer had any family. He sounded very bitter, like someone who just couldn't get over what happened to him. But Desiree had recently gotten married and she changed her last name. So she thought, okay, maybe he doesn't recognize my name. But that wasn't it. It was like he didn't want to recognize her as family. And his final message was just cruel. He said, "I don't have any family anymore. I have no clue who you are. Now stop messaging me." The words just didn't sound like Michael at all. To those who knew him, the situation felt more and more suspicious. This reminds me so much of the Carrie Farver case.
Oh, yeah.
That one is so twisted and it made my head spin, and so does this case.
As the new year approached, things between Travis and Lori became even more serious, especially after she found out that she was pregnant with their first child. Travis was over the moon. He could hardly believe it. And to celebrate their growing family, they decided to have their wedding ceremony right in Lori's backyard, overlooking the pastures.
They set up a wooden archway with the white drapes just flowing in the wind, and Travis stood beside little Aiden in matching outfits, black button-down shirts and a pair of jeans. And little Isabel was matching the bride in a white dress, waiting for her mom under the archway across from her new soon-to-be stepdad Travis and her little brother. The guests sat on bales of hay with Travis's grandfather, walking Lori down the aisle. She looked gorgeous in her white dress and her pearl choker necklace, her veil flowing in the wind. The four of them walked away as onlookers celebrated and shouted out happily. It was a really special occasion. Lori may have been able to move on, but Michael's family hadn't.
And since November 7th, 2015, it seemed like Lori was the only one who ever saw or talked to Michael. Time passed, and by 2017, Michael was basically erased. No more text, no more messages, nothing on Facebook. And then, at the start of 2018, something weird happens. Michael's profile picture changes to a photo of a group of guys at a bar. The guys were laughing and drinking together.
So it looks like he is moving on with his life at this point.
Well, not exactly. Remember Scott?
Yeah, that's Michael's childhood best friend.
Right. Scott had known Michael the longest, even longer than Lori. He had been really worried about his friend, but with life being as hectic as it was and dealing with his own breakup and other things, he wasn't keeping in touch as much as before. But still, he would check in from time to see what was going on. No one could get a response from Michael through text or calls, so they would resort to checking his Facebook, which was still occasionally active. Scott was just scrolling when he saw that Michael's profile picture had changed. And at first, he thought, oh my God, he's alive. He hadn't spoke to him in so long, so it felt like a good sign. The post had a date. It was January 2nd, 2018, about a month earlier, but something felt off. Scott stared at the photo, and then it clicked. None of the men in the picture looked like Michael at all.
Wait, what do you mean?
Right, so he zooms in, and he's searching for his friend, and none of them look like Michael.
But I thought Michael was the one wearing the green beanie. I just assumed it was because he's like raising his glass to the camera.
Well, Scott knew his friend, and he knew none of these guys were him. So he does a reverse image search.
That's what I was going to say to do. I was like, I would do the same thing. Get that picture on Google and figure it out.
And that's when he realizes that it's a stock photo from an alcohol ad.
Wow.
Yeah, and not only that, Scott noticed that Michael had unfriended him.
Okay, that would be really odd to me too if you're just deleted from your friends list after like a 20-year friendship?
Right. Scott knew Michael would never do that. He wasn't the type to just cut people off. That's when Scott decided that enough is enough. It had been 2 years, and he was done waiting. If no one was going to look for Michael, he would.
It's always the best friend. We all need a friend who will stop at nothing to make sure that we're okay, right?
And maybe if Scott hadn't questioned it, no one else would have. That's where it would have ended. Maybe no one would have ever asked any more questions, but he did. And he was about to pull on a thread that would unravel everything. Because no matter how many times Lori said he left, Scott Amatuccio refused to believe it. And it was that stock photo on Michael's Facebook that really raised a red flag. Michael would never use some random image on his profile. He used to post all the time pictures of himself traveling, flying, working with Precious Metals aviation team, spending time with family and friends. But then his cover photo became a gun, and his profile picture was something pulled from an alcohol ad. Scott decided to dig a little deeper into Michael's Facebook profile, and that's when he realized he had been unfriended. After all these years, that's when he drew the final straw. So Scott reached out to Michael's sister Stacy, and they started comparing notes. Nothing seemed to add up.
Right. And Stacy being Michael's sister, she's going to be closer to him than most. So she talked to their brother Brian and their dad Doug and their sister Christine, and they had all received messages that were really weird the past couple of years. They were completely out of character. Can you imagine 2 years going by though and not actually having a full conversation with a family member? And I was sitting here trying to think if anything like that was going on in my life. And I thought about my dad, because we do communicate over Facebook more than anywhere else. So I could see that happening. But in these messages, he would refer to Brian as bro, it's his brother, but it's a word he would never use. And he was even rude to his own father. And there was this one time that Michael reached out to his sister and asked for his mom's own phone number that hadn't changed in over 30 years. So it was getting weirder. And his recent posts on Facebook were strange too. As they looked back over his profile, it looked different. He usually posted pictures of himself doing things like Jon said, flying planes, helping friends with projects, fixing engines, just being Mike. But now it was a bunch of memes. There was one of that Dos Equis guy, and it said some people need to mind their business with a hashtag get a life. And there was another one that said, I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I get drunk. The posts were just lame. Either he had a mental break and lost touch with every part of who he was at his core, or this wasn't Mike at all, and someone else was posting as Mike, using his account to make it appear that he was okay when he wasn't. So Scott lived in Florida, but Michael's family, like you said, was out of the state. They were in New York. So it was decided that Scott would drive to the local police department and report Michael missing. Of course, the first question that they ask is, when was the last time you seen him? And he's like, years. And if you want to laugh, it's okay, because the cops they were like, okay, buddy, you haven't talked to your friend in years and you're just now reporting him missing. It's not the usual case, because we all know the urgency when someone goes missing. Scott said that the last time he saw him was when he went four-wheeling on October 11th of 2015. That's it. Then they just lost contact. Well, the least that the cops decide to do is go into a wellness check, because that's easy. They'll just go over to Lori's house and confirm her story that he left. And they were thinking, you know what? Maybe if it's law enforcement, she'll give them just a little more information than she's been giving others. Scott said Michael would never leave his children. Lori, yes, but not the kids.
On February 16th, 2018, Corporal Corey Anderson and Deputy Morris went out to Lori's house. She came to the door with her newborn in arms, standing on the porch as they talked. She was friendly, calm, and to the point. She explained that Mike had left her and the kids and moved to Georgia. The last time she claimed to have seen him was in September of 2014, when he came to pick up the last of his things, after being arrested for harming her during an argument. The officers asked if they could take a look around the property. Lori welcomed them and was completely cooperative. The property was vast, with several outbuildings, a chicken coop, a rabbit hutch, a fire pit, and an above-ground pool, but nothing looked out of the ordinary. It wasn't until they asked if they could do a more thorough search, maybe even bring some canines out, and Lori's demeanor changed. She told them they would need a warrant for that, and at that point, she actually told them to leave her property.
which she had every right to do at this point, and she's also postpartum, so she's overly emotional. She calls her husband Travis in tears, telling him the cops are here, they're looking for Mike, and now she's got to deal with being interrogated after all that she's been through. But it's about to get really crazy, so hold on tight. Don't miss a beat or you're gonna get lost in all the chaos. Are you ready? Because when officers confirmed to Scott that Lori told them the same story, that Michael just left, that his truck was repossessed, that they were going to need a warrant to search her property, Scott's heart sank. Michael loved his truck. He worked on it constantly. He would never just leave it behind. Scott couldn't ignore it anymore. He'd been trying to push it down, trying to give Lori the benefit of the doubt. But now he was sure of one thing. Michael never left. And if he didn't leave, that meant something much worse happened to him. He was convinced that Lori Shaver had done something to his friend and was impersonating him on Facebook and via text.
Yeah, it kind of sounded far-fetched, and officers didn't seem too interested in taking a report or pushing forward with it. I mean, adults are allowed to disappear. They're allowed to leave their families. There was no proof that Michael was actually missing. Plus, he had supposedly told people not to contact him.
Right, but Scott was reiterating that wasn't Mike. He was furious. He's like, no, you don't get it. Like, yes, he told people not to contact him, but that's not our friend. That's not how, you know how you would know better. And this cop is like, oh, well, I see right here. He's saying don't contact me. So it is infuriating because you're like, no, dude, that's what I'm saying. So he's laying out all the red flags again, and he just refused to let it go. And that's what you need to do. You need to keep pushing on.
Persistence.
Yes, the persistence pays off. So he showed all the evidence he had up until that point. And finally, Corporal Anderson starts to think it does look kind of odd.
Plus, Lori had changed the timeline. She told officers the last time she saw Michael was September 4th, 2014, almost a whole year earlier than when he went to that tractor show with Frank and his family in November of 2015. The story wasn't adding up.
Exactly. She said it was a year before that, and everybody knows, like, we saw him at the tractor show. So that made her look even more suspicious, and that made him more curious. Why lie? So he ran their names in the system, and guess what pops up? An arrest. Michael's arrest. There was a 911 call related to this incident, and we're going to play it for you, and then we're going to discuss it.
911, do you need police, fire, or the ambulance service? Please. I'm on my way to the sheriff's office right now. I got my kids in love. What's going on? It was a domestic violence dispute. My hand is bleeding. I grabbed my gun because he has a gun and I hit him in the head with it. I grabbed my kids and left.
He pulled out a gun on you?
Oh, yeah. He grabbed my car keys and stuck them in his pocket. I fought him to get my keys out of his pocket, and then I grabbed my kids.
Has there been any drinking tonight?
Yes, there has. We've probably had 3 beers since 2 o'clock.
You both had 3 beers?
Yeah.
Lori was driving when she made that call. She said that her and her kids were in the car and she was on her way to the police station, that things got physical with Michael and she was bleeding from her hand. And Lori said they had fights before, but it had never gotten physical until that night. And yes, they'd been drinking. They both had at least 3 beers each. And she said she grabbed her gun because Michael had a gun. And she took her gun and hit him in the head to try to get away. Michael had apparently grabbed her keys, put them in his pocket so that she couldn't leave. So she was fighting him to get her keys and finally broke free when she struck him.
But according to the report, Mike's version was completely different. It was all Lori. He had been trying to de-escalate the situation, and he only took her keys because he didn't want her driving with their kids after she'd been drinking. And just a month before that, on August 1st, 2014, Lori had actually crashed her truck. She slammed it into a tree, totaling it. Both of their children were inside the vehicle and were injured. Lori claimed she had just reached down to grab her purse, but others, including Mike, believed that she had been drinking. She swerved and then overcorrected and hit the tree.
That's so dangerous. But these are both claims by 2 different people who are now not getting along. And when the police came out there, they were both bleeding, Mike from his head and Lori on her hand. Mike said that it turned violent so fast he doesn't remember who hit who first. But he did admit that he grabbed her to calm her down and that Lori threw a vase of flowers at him, which shattered and broke against a sliding glass door. He said Lori was the one that ran and grabbed her .38 caliber Cobra handgun out of her nightstand and screamed that she was going to end it now, whatever that meant.
Michael said he was wrestling her for the gun and only grabbed his gun because he was afraid for his life. When he finally cornered her, she struck him in the head with the butt of her gun.
Fighting with guns, just like fighting with guns in and of itself, is so reckless and terrifying. I mean, they have 2 kids in their home. But because of these conflicting statements, they couldn't determine who the aggressor was.
But Michael admitted that he grabbed Lori and took her keys, so he was arrested on a battery charge.
But that night, Michael's sister Stacy posted on Facebook, and this is what she said, quote, "Along with the DV charges, Lori took off with the kids, driving drunk while Michael waited at his home for the police. They were both going to be arrested, and the children would have been placed with CPS. So Michael told the police just to take him, essentially saying he admitted to what he did because he didn't want his kids taken away." Stacy was not only calling out Lori, but also saying her brother only admitted to grabbing Lori so that both of them wouldn't be arrested and the kids would be left with CPS, which could have most certainly been the truth, right?
Yeah.
But it didn't matter because eventually that charge against Michael would be dropped by Lori, and it seemed the couple was trying to work things out. It's definitely toxic, though. Anyone that's drinking alcohol, fighting with firearms, they should know that they're in a very volatile situation. But then again, it's hard to judge. I'm sure they both love their kids, and it's complicated.
Well, the problem was the officer noticed something unsettling. After November 7th, 2015, Michael never registered another cell phone, never renewed his driver's license, and never applied for an out-of-state license. He didn't renew his pilot's license, didn't use a bank account, didn't use his credit cards, and didn't even touch his social security number ever again.
I would say that that's not normal, but then there are people who simply want to disappear. They might even go to another country for all we know. So they wouldn't have any of those things over here in the United States.
Right, but if Michael really moved to Georgia like Lori claimed, there would be some kind of record. But there was nothing. The man wasn't working, he had no addresses, no phone, he wasn't driving. Even his truck had been repossessed because Lori let it be taken away, remember that? That's when the deputy decided to enter Michael into the NCIC, the National Crime Information Center database, as an official missing person. Now, a real investigation was finally underway to get to the bottom of where Michael was. The first people they wanted to talk to were the closest to Michael. They had already spoken at length with Scott, so next they wanted to reach out to Robert Mercado, the guy Lori claimed had picked up Michael in a black SUV.
The conversation with Robert immediately raised red flags. Robert didn't even drive a black SUV. He drove a blue sedan. But he told the police he never picked up Michael. He never drove him anywhere. It just wasn't true. And as a matter of fact, the same day Michael had been texting his boss and coworker, he also texted Robert to leave him alone and never contact him again. Now, Robert was shocked, as we told you, because remember, he had plans for Thanksgiving dinner with Michael and his family. So this was very confusing. He had no idea that Lori had been telling people that he drove Michael to Georgia, which was a complete lie. And I wish we had like one of those whiteboards or something to keep track of everything the investigators are going to check off. Either this was a lie, it was incorrect, or it was just suspicious. So they need to speak with more people. And they spoke to a neighbor named Wilma. She was the closest to the Shaver property. They asked her if maybe she had seen Michael or anything out of the ordinary. Well, first, she explained that even though there was some land between them, there were no trees separating their properties. So, of course, the noise will carry. And she could hear arguments coming from Lori and Michael's home starting in 2014 after they moved in. She was friendly with both of them. She actually reached out to Lori once, asking, "Is everything okay?" And Lori said, "Oh, we're just fine." From the outside, everyone would see them smiling and having fun together. So Wilma figured it was none of her business. Until she gets a call from Mike. The same night that the 911 call came in from Lori, Mike was begging Wilma to come over because he needed help.
So she ran over to his house, and when he opened the door, he was covered in blood. It was pouring from his head, dripping down his face. His clothes were ripped, and there were marks all over his body. He asked Wilma to take pictures to document what Lori had done to him. So she snapped a ton of photos. And guess what? She still had them. She handed everything over to the investigators. She explained that from what Michael told her, he was only defending himself. She even saw the bloody gun. It was just sitting on the bed. It looked like a .38, but instead of silver, it was pink.
Right. It was personalized. It looked more like a woman's gun. She also saw the roses on the floor and the smashed vase like Michael had reported that night. And Michael was forced to move out of the house because Lori got a restraining order after his arrest. He had nowhere to go. and it was embarrassing for him to admit, so he ended up sleeping at work. It was in this big airplane hangar, and luckily, it did have the essentials: a small kitchen, a full bathroom, and couches, providing him with a temporary place to stay. Despite working a full-time job, Michael continued to work part-time at this hangar, so he had a place where he could work and also to sleep during this turbulent time in his life. And as more friends are interviewed, they say that they never saw Mike yell at Lori, and he would never just unprovoked start to grab her or push her or any of that. One friend said that when Michael was staying at the hangar, he suspected that Lori was cheating, that she actually had been for a while, and him and his friend actually get into a plane and they fly over the house to see if there's a guy's truck out in the driveway. Now that does sound a little extreme, but they're pilots. Like, to me, it's extreme.
If you got the means.
Right. But they are still married, let's not forget. And he just wanted to know. He just wanted to see if he was right or if the relationship could be saved. He confronted Lori a number of times about his suspicions, but she would always just deny it. And this was the source of their arguments. As everyone could see now, the cracks had begun to form in the seemingly idyllic life. But Michael was determined to keep his family together. By the summer of 2015, he was living at home again and building his life back, or so he thought. While they were separated, Lori was actually seeing someone else, and so was Michael. He was dating a woman named Kendall Davidowski. He met her at Disney, and they worked together, and the relationship lasted from November 2014 to May of 2015, so right before Michael went back to live with Lori.
Lori didn't approve of Michael dating another woman, even though she was seeing other men.
Yeah, and she made that very clear to him.
Even though they were separated because of Lori, she was still super possessive over him. She'd call him nonstop, screaming at him right in front of Kendall. Kendall even remembered one argument where Lori warned Michael that if he kept seeing her, he'd never see his kids again.
Yikes, that's bad. And at first, Lori didn't know who this Kendall person was. But once she finally figured it out, she started sending her harassing messages on Facebook demanding that she end things with Michael or face serious consequences. She threatened to ruin Kendall's career and disrupt her entire life. She wasn't going to leave this poor woman alone. A woman who only got involved with Michael because he was forced out of his own home and Lori was seeing other people. So it was okay if Lori dated someone, but not Michael. What did she expect him to do? Just wait around forever? Kendall also believed that Lori was using her children as a pawn to manipulate Michael, which is just cruel. And I feel so bad for the kids caught in the middle because they love both their parents. But the harassment escalated when Lori labeled Kendall a homewrecker and threatened to expose her as a homewrecker to her own family. To make matters worse, Lori named specific relatives, including Kendall's grandma, clarifying that she had researched her and she was prepared to drag Kendall's family into this whole situation. Now, Kendall saw this as very unnecessary and a malicious attempt to control both her and Michael. And at this point, she had never even met this woman and, of course, wanted nothing to do with her.
It's like a twisted version of if I can't have you, no one will. But in this case, it's I don't want you, but I don't want anyone else to have you either.
It's very odd. And whenever Michael would spend the night at Kendall's, he would first stop by the airplane hangar just to make sure Lori wasn't following them. So you can see how scared they were. They thought Lori was unhinged.
But it got even worse. In March, Michael called Kendall with an urgent warning. He told her to park in a different lot at work because Lori was on her way to confront her, and she had a gun. The threat left Kendall shaken. She couldn't wrap her head around it. If Lori didn't want to have Michael anymore, why did she care so much if someone else did?
That's what I keep thinking. Like, why is she even in his business? Like, she's doing her own thing at this point. And by May, Kendall had had enough, and rightfully so. She really liked Michael, but she just couldn't take it anymore. Lori was just too much. She ended the relationship because it was starting to affect her job, and that's because Lori had escalated her harassment by filing complaints with Disney. Yep. She sent complaints to the HR department, falsely accusing Kendall of breaking up her marriage and engaging in inappropriate behaviors at work. And I think you know what I'm talking about. And these accusations were completely untrue, but Kendall knew that Lori's relentless interference could definitely put her career at risk. Kendall did not break up their marriage. This was all Lori from what it looked like to detectives, and her true colors were really starting to show.
After Michael's relationship with Kendall ended, Lori allowed him to move back home, but she kept seeing other men.
I don't like allowed. Like, I understand that's exactly what happened, but they both own that house.
Right.
It's like, Okay. And so Michael wasn't crazy. She was cheating, right?
Yeah, she was, but Michael had no idea at the time. But if he did, he never told anyone close to him. This is only coming out now because of the investigation. Investigators interviewed one of Lori's exes, Jeremy Townsend, the guy she met at the park. She met him in September of 2015, right when Michael was back home, trying to make things work.
So he probably suspected something was going on.
Yeah, he always had.
I was wondering if those roses, remember the roses that were smashed? I was like, okay, was that Michael trying to like reconcile, or had they possibly been delivered to the house by someone else and this was the catalyst for the fight?
Right.
I don't know. I'm just speculating here. But supposedly, from what I read, the fight back then started because of a home construction project that wasn't going well. Maybe it was the pond that he was supposed to dig. He wasn't moving fast enough. But back to Jeremy, or Jay, as she liked to call him, he was married. So this wasn't just Lori going behind Michael's back. Jeremy was having an affair. This is just so messy. This never ends well. But during this time, Lori told Jeremy that she was going through a divorce and she knew that Jeremy was married, but he confided in her that him and his wife were contemplating getting a divorce as well, but they were still working things out. He made it clear that this thing with Lori was strictly physical, that it was more of a friends with benefits kind of thing, and Lori agreed at first. But then it became very apparent that Lori had other plans, especially after November when she told everyone, including Jeremy, that Michael had left her. Soon, she started pressuring Jeremy to leave his wife, even though that's not what he wanted. Lori's feelings had intensified and she wanted Jeremy all to herself. She wanted his wife out of the picture. She was now stalking him and his wife Vanessa on Facebook, snooping around and getting upset for what she was seeing Jeremy do. But it's like, you're sleeping with a married ass man. And you're married, but you're getting mad that he's posing in pictures with his wife? She was mad that he was wearing his wedding ring because that's what she was texting him about. This was in February, so they'd officially been talking since September, but in a full-blown physical affair together since December 1st. So now, okay, it's been about 2 months, and Lori's obsessed. This led Lori to sending Jeremy some very heated text messages where she was threatening to have her neighbors vouch for the fact that he was cheating on his wife. She sent him a picture from his Facebook of him and his wife together, and she zoomed in on his hand and said, "Nice wedding ring. I thought you didn't wear that anymore," because he had taken it off for a little while, but he was working things out with his wife. So he put it back on, and he's in a picture. Like, of course he's going to be wearing his wedding ring. I mean, the man is cheating, but it's kind of crazy that she has the nerve to get on this man for trying to work things out. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. The two wrongs also don't make a right. They're both cheating.
That's a good way to work things out with your wife, by being physical with someone else's.
Oh, trust me, the detectives would definitely go hard on him for all of that when they're interviewing him.
But it seemed like being with Lori kind of opened Jeremy's eyes to make things work out with Vanessa, because as time went on, it was obvious that his intention was to end things with Lori and stay married.
Right. I mean, yes, he was cheating, but it definitely opened his eyes. Like, it was a, wait a minute, I made a big mistake.
The grass is not always green.
Exactly. And Lori was definitely not okay with him going back to his wife. She called him a liar. She even accused him of shaving his beard off because he was trying to hide his identity since her neighbors could identify him. Can you imagine how uncomfortable that would be if your neighbor asked you to come forward and out this guy for cheating? Again, this is just very messy. It's a lot of drama. At this point, Vanessa was not aware of the affair, and Lori knew that Jeremy would never speak to her again and definitely not continue sleeping with her if Lori reached out to his wife. But Vanessa did end up finding out about the affair. But it wasn't until April 12th. By this time, Lori had actually gotten a heart-shaped tattoo with the letter J above her hoo-ha. Yep, I think you know what I'm talking about. It was almost like she was branded with his initial. She's convinced herself that Jeremy was her future, but it was all one-sided. And who gets a tattoo of a guy's name or even his initial after just a couple months? I mean, we did get matching tattoos after a month that we were dating, but we knew each other for years, and they weren't our names or each other's names because I've heard that that is bad luck. We just got an inside joke. The word actually.
Yeah, I mean, ranchers brand livestock, so if they go missing, you know who they belong
But
to.
that's what a brand is. Like, that's why people get branded.
Right, but
Because-
I understand the symbology of eternal love.
No, it's just like, I'm his, which is weird. Because wouldn't she want her initial on him? Because she's trying to possess him.
Yeah. And by the way, our vlog channel is actually called Actually Us.
And that's why it's called that. But back to Lori's case. It was actually scary, this tattoo. I mean, imagine knowing that someone got that.
Jeremy instantly pulled back, his mind racing. He wasn't leaving his wife. He never planned to. But that tattoo, that changed everything. It made him realize that Lori was way more invested than he ever intended to be. She wanted more from him than he was willing to give. But Lori wasn't backing down. She was convinced that she could change his mind, that eventually he'd leave his wife for her. That's why she wanted people to find out about the affair.
And his wife, Vanessa, did end up finding out about the affair, and it could have happened way sooner, but she was not in the habit of paying much attention to her DMs on Facebook. That would be me. I had messages in there that hadn't been read in years. But on April 12th of 2016, Vanessa goes up to her husband, Jeremy, and she says, "Who's Mike?" And Jeremy legitimately couldn't place it. He didn't know who this Mike was, who she was referring to, and why she was asking. She'd been getting DMs on Facebook from Michael Shaver all the way back in February, but she never opened them. But on April 12th, Vanessa gets a special delivery while she's at work. Flowers. Now, at first, she probably thought they were from Jeremy since they were working things out in the relationship. But it gets creepy. There's a handwritten note attached. "Roses are red, violets are blue. My wife is a whore. Your husband is too. Sorry about this. Check your Facebook messages. We need to talk." And the note was simply signed, Mike. So now Vanessa is officially freaked out. She finally opens all those old messages, and sure enough, they are from a Michael Shaver, warning her that her husband was having an affair with Michael's soon-to-be ex-wife, Lori.
What's strange about the timing of the flower delivery is that by then, Lori had already met her future husband, Travis, but they weren't together yet.
Right, she met Travis back in January when her best friend Rebecca threw that bonfire in Lori's backyard, but she was still seeing Jeremy. And there she was, swooning over Travis, talking all about him all the time to Rebecca. So it's like she just flip-flops whenever she likes someone new. But Travis was in a relationship, so they didn't get together officially until the month afterward in May. So a month after the flowers were sent to Vanessa. I know this is a lot, but try to stay with us because it is going to get intense. But Lori and Jeremy were still sleeping together, but not after this.
So what did the DM say?
Oh, right. Okay, so they seemed like a husband that was genuinely concerned about his estranged wife, trying to make Vanessa aware that her husband was, kind of standing in the way of him making things work with Lori. The first one said, "Hello, Vanessa. I know you don't know me, but I keep sending you a friend request because I really need to talk with you about something important. I'm not a creep, I promise. I'm looking to confirm some information regarding my wife." Well, Vanessa never opened that message. Then the next one came in a day later on February 25th. It said, "I work third shift and sleep during the day, but if you let me know when you can talk, I'll make myself available. Thank you." There was no response to that one either. So another one is sent on March 3rd. It said, "I believe your husband is having an affair with my soon-to-be ex-wife. We're going through a divorce and I'm running out of time. I need to confirm it's him. Is your husband Jeremy Townsend? Does he drive a white truck? Please, I need to confirm." And again, there was no response. So yet another message is sent. This time it said, "I don't think you're getting my messages. I just sent you something. I hope you contact me when you receive." Wow. So, of course, this time, Vanessa reads all of this, and he had proof too. He had installed supposedly this app on Lori's phone and had copies of all the text messages between her and Jeremy. Now, remember all the DMs are being sent to Vanessa, but she wasn't opening them? They just kept coming, being more and more intense each time until screenshots from his supposed app were sent to Vanessa. And these were screenshots of messages between Lori and Jeremy, things like, "I really need you to be my love." That was from Jeremy. And Lori's response was, "I am your love, and I have been since the moment we met and always will be." And other really gushy stuff like, "I miss you more and good morning. I hope you slept well. I love you." And this is from a married man. One I laughed at was that Lori texted Jeremy, I can't wait to smell you. But of course, this is not funny. These were messages sent to this woman who is just finding out right now that her husband is cheating. And there were even sexting conversations, which included photos, and I'm sure you know what kind. I would be livid if I saw that.
What's weird is that Michael wasn't telling Vanessa to get a handle on her husband so he'd stop being involved with Lori. Instead, he was sending her names of divorce attorneys, saying he was divorcing Lori and giving her referrals in case she needed them to divorce Jeremy.
Well, misery loves company.
Right? But not only had Jeremy been cheating, but Michael insinuated that Lori was pregnant with his baby.
Oh my goodness.
I think everyone knows there's more to this story, and the investigators were putting the pieces together. Vanessa didn't divorce Jeremy. He had a lot of explaining to do, including telling his wife about his mistake. And that's exactly what it was, a huge mistake. But wow, did it turn into something way bigger? But we'll get to that. But at this point, Vanessa found out about the obsessive behavior, the tattoo, everything. And she still chose to stay with her husband. She let Mike know, and after that, the DMs finally stopped by April 21st. They thought that this would be the last time they'd have to deal with Lori, but as we know, they were now being questioned by investigators about Mike's disappearance.
So were all Mike's friends and coworkers, and they painted a much different picture of Mike and Lori. A coworker of Michael's named Corey noticed in mid to late 2015 that Michael would come to work on a number of occasions with mysterious bruises on his face, chest, and arms. And Michael told him that Lori would get so angry with him that she would punch him with a closed fist. Michael told Corey that he had no choice but to take the punches because he wasn't raised to hit a woman.
But why didn't he report her or get someone to help him?
Well, actually, Corey asked him that, and Michael said that it wasn't worth it because essentially it would be way too much work because he knew Lori and he knew her better than anyone else, that she was a good liar and she had already gotten him thrown in jail, and he just rather let it happen. But it escalated to Lori getting so mad at Mike that she would throw things at him in violent outbursts. And on one occasion, she got so mad, she threw something at him and it missed and it broke their kitchen window. And we know she threw that vase of flowers and it smashed and broke, but I think it's hard to know the truth. Now, I'm sure these coworkers knew Mike well, but there could be a world in which a man with bruises doesn't mean the woman was the aggressor, but rather the victim was fighting back, right? So it's hard for people to know what's going on. But remember the tractor show that Mike's other coworker, Frank Merritt, and his family met him at? Lori was there with the kids and with Mike, but it wasn't a happy family affair. Frank told the investigators that Lori was in a terrible mood that day. She was openly hostile. She refused to make eye contact with Frank or his family, and she wouldn't even have a basic conversation with them. It was really uncomfortable. The tension between her and Mike was so unbearable that Mike pulled Frank aside and said that he was really sorry, but it was probably best that he took Lori and the kids home. It totally ruined the day. Now, this was one day before Frank texted Mike to check in with him and got no answer. This was the last time anyone other than Lori had physically seen Mike.
And Frank was shocked when Lori started selling off all of Mike's things. His ATVs, his expensive tools. She even tried to sell the house for $150,000 but couldn't get a clear title from Michael. It all seems so strange to Frank. He even offered to buy some of the stuff, including Mike's firearms, just in case Mike came back and wanted to buy them back. He just felt awful that Mike was losing all his possessions, but whenever he'd text Mike about it, he'd get these weird messages back from Mike's number, accusing him of trying to steal his stuff and saying that he didn't care what happened to any of it.
When investigators dig further into Lori's claims, they uncover even more discrepancies. For one, there was no divorce, meaning that she and Mike were legally still married. He never signed any divorce papers, and there was no child support order in place that Mike could have violated. None of that existed. So all the time she told people like her supposed new husband Travis and Travis's mom that she had good news, the divorce was finalized, or that Mike was in jail for not paying child support, which was another story that she had told people. And Mike never went to any hearings in 2015, as she claimed, when she said he had to be put into another room so he wouldn't violate the no contact due to stalking allegations. With the tracking devices, remember that? Mike wasn't making contact with anyone anywhere after November 7th of 2015. And that was becoming more and more apparent. It's interesting that she never mentioned any of those stalking incidents to the police. She claimed to Rebecca that the cops investigated her vehicle for tracking devices and removed them, but there was no record of this whatsoever. According to Michael's sister Stacy, Lori was so controlling that she would only let Michael talk on the phone to his family for about 20 minutes before she would come in and like physically make him hang up the phone.
Wow.
I know. He's a grown man and he can't even speak with his own family. This is classic isolation tactics.
Right. And Stacy could never see Michael either. Every time she planned a trip with her kids to visit him, it just never happened. Right before she was supposed to leave, Lori would stir up some kind of chaos, and then Michael would call her and tell her it wasn't a good time.
I can actually relate to this because my stepmother used to do this to me all the time with my father. She was very controlling and very manipulating. And anytime I'd want to spend some quality time with my dad, especially alone and have like daddy-daughter things, she would mysteriously get physically ill. Something would come up that needed my dad's attention, and the list goes on. It is very narcissistic. These are those narcissistic tendencies, and I'm so sensitive to them now. But back to Lori. Lori exhibited the same behavior.
But I have to ask you something. If she wasn't divorced, how was she married to Travis Filmer?
Oh, we're going to get there. I'm sure everyone has that same question because he was about to be interviewed by investigators. And I'll tell you this, though. It seemed as though Travis was Lori's biggest crusader, her biggest fan. Travis was in love with Lori, and she could do no wrong. His perspective would be very interesting. Here's the backstory. Travis may look like an all-American boy next door, but he had a past. At least 4 felony charges starting back in 2007 when Travis was only 18. Aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Then a year later, burglary and battery, as well as tampering with physical evidence, and even domestic battery by strangulation. But for now, let's table that last charge because it happened after police interviewed Travis about what he knew of Michael Shaver's disappearance. At the time, Travis was actually a church youth leader. I wonder if churches actually do background checks, or maybe if they're like nonviolent, you can still work there. He was working with youth. I don't know. But it was really odd because many people realized that Travis looked a lot like Michael. You could easily mistake him for Michael. People figured Lori must definitely just had a type. They look like they could be brothers. It's like she replaced Michael with a replica. They dressed alike. They both had that short hair and the light eyes.
So when detectives knocked on Lori's door to talk to Travis, Travis told them that he never met Mike. He had no idea where he was and couldn't even say what he looked like. He said he wouldn't even recognize him if they showed him a picture, which they did, and still he had nothing for them. The detectives said, okay, we'll be in touch, and then Lori lawyered up.
Travis wasn't legally her husband. Their marriage was phony. It was all a sham, and Travis knew it, but everyone else seemed to be in the dark. Lori had told Travis, according to him, that she wanted to marry him, but after the trauma of her past relationship with Michael, she wasn't interested in signing a legal contract that would make her a man's property. But she was willing to have a commitment ceremony under God to show her loyalty and love for Travis. He said he understood, but that didn't stop him and Lori from portraying the event as a wedding. The guests, including his mother and granddad, who actually walked Lori down the aisle, they all believed they were attending a legal marriage, and they had no reason not to believe that. I mean, they said their vows with an officiant. It was definitely fishy. And Travis even listed himself as married on his Facebook profile afterward. It sounds like Travis knew way more than he was letting on, because why play along if you know it's not real? I thought about it and I was like, okay, he worked at a church. It would look kind of bad if he wasn't married, but he was like living with this woman, having a baby because now she's pregnant. So maybe for appearances, he went along with it because he loved her and it was enough for him at the time, as long as everyone else assumed that they were married. But still, when investigators are putting all of this together, the fake wedding, no records of anything Lori was claiming, all the weird messages from Mike, no one seeing him, no license, no cell phone, no home, it was not looking good. And Lori seemed to be the only person who would have benefited from Mike being gone.
And just like that, Michael Shaver's story was all over the local news. His friends were seeing the segments, their jaws dropped as it finally sank in that Mike was truly missing. Something bad had happened to Mike, and the neighbors were shocked. Wilma couldn't believe it. Everyone was in this phase of realizing this kind of thing happens to other people and their families, but never theirs. They never thought that they would know someone who would actually disappear. Meanwhile, Lori's friends thought this whole thing was just a huge misunderstanding. They were convinced that it would all get cleared up soon and that Mike would return now that the case was getting attention and everything would go back to normal.
But we all know the media. Once they latch onto a story and it's getting views and gaining traction, they don't back down. Channel 9, the local news station, was all over the story. They went out to Lori's, the cameras were on, the microphones were ready, and they waited until Lori came out. And then they bombarded her with questions. They didn't hold back. They wanted to know, where was Michael? But Lori wouldn't talk.
She would just tell them that she had an attorney and that they could contact him if they had any questions.
She was not interested in cooperating with the media at all. And investigators were still working on securing a search warrant for the property. And one reason they were so interested in getting access to that land is because of a theory that Mike's best friend Scott had. He, like many of Mike's other friends and family, were doing an investigation of their own. They were meticulously looking through all of Lori's Facebook posts from November 7th of 2015 and on, and they uncovered something chilling. Remember the duck pond? I know we mentioned it maybe briefly, but Lori loved her ducks, and Mike had been diligently working on excavating an area in the backyard to create a pond where the ducks could swim. It was a project he'd been working on for a while. Many people saw him digging this hole, but then, of course, when he disappeared, it was never finished. However, on March 23rd of 2016, Lori posted a picture on Facebook of the same area of that property with the caption, "My newest project is underway. Built a fire pit. This is going to be a great summer." The area no longer had a huge hole for a pond. It was filled in, and bricks were arranged in a circle for this new fire pit. This is later where she would hold the bonfire in January.
But that's not all. By September, there would be a cement slab surrounding the fire pit.
Exactly. And that was Scott's biggest concern. He knew that this was the exact spot where Michael had been digging that duck pond upon Lori's request. And now he had this sick feeling that Michael had been digging his own grave.
Yeah, that's creepy.
It is. It's very chilling. Now, we didn't tell you this, but at the time, Scott voiced this theory back when he initially told police that Mike was missing. And of course, it sounded outlandish. It sounded like something from a fictional story. Someone's estranged husband was buried in their backyard. But when those deputies went out there, one said he literally got chills down his spine. Have you ever heard of grave subsidence?
No, what is that?
It's also known as grave sinking. And in cemeteries where the graves are dug and left in dirt, the caskets will fall deeper and deeper into the earth. As the air continues to escape, the soil settles over time, and the weather takes a toll on the ground. You can see a hole in the shape of the sides of a casket. Well, when a body is buried under concrete, the same process happens, but it presents a little differently. The soil underneath still settles, especially when it's a lot looser in a makeshift grave, but there's evidence on the surface. As the body decomposes, it releases moisture and gases that weaken the material above it. And over time, as soft tissues liquefy and drain into that same soil, the ground starts to shift, water pools in unnatural places, and the earth practically tells on you. It creates what's called a cadaver decomposition island, a distinctive spot in the earth, but instead of being above the ground, this island is below. It creates a depression as the composition of the soil changes. As the officers looked around that fire pit and the concrete slab it was sitting on, there was an obvious depression in the concrete, the size of a human body. It had been collecting rainwater only in that specific spot, leaving a distinctive ring of demarcation. Now it wasn't just fiction. They believed a body, Michael's body, could be right there.
So as they were walking around, that's why they wanted to do a more thorough search.
Yeah, because we're showing it on the screen. This is like a very obvious depression in that concrete. And you can't help this from happening because of the process that the body goes through. And that's what they told Lori. They said that they wanted to bring cadaver dogs out there, not just canines, but ones trained to locate decomposing bodies. And that's when Lori said, "Get off my property. You're going to need a warrant." And if that's not suspicious, I don't know what is.
So the theory was that after that tractor show on November 7th, 2015, Lori killed Michael and put his body in the duck pond that he had been digging.
Yeah, and that it was her plan all along, even having him dig his own grave, telling him to come back home, that she wanted to make things right. And all the while, she's seeing other men and she's planning his murder. They were sure of it. They just needed to get a search warrant to prove it. And if Michael's body was under that concrete, then they knew this theory proved true. By March 9th of 2018, deputies finally had their chance. They had enough probable cause for a search warrant. This was an extensive search. They brought everyone in: homicide investigators, crime scene technicians, forensic anthropologists, cadaver dogs, ground penetrating radar. There were police vehicles up and down that rural street.
And the media was there documenting all of it.
And some of the evidence that led to this warrant was from Travis Filmer and Jeremy Townsend, the two men that Lori had been dating after Michael left. Jeremy had told investigators that the first time he went to Lori's house, which was after Michael had vanished, he immediately noticed something was off when he saw bloodstains on a pair of jeans that Lori was wearing. She wore these jeans all the time. And then it's like she realized that he noticed. She changed her clothes and he never saw those jeans again.
And Travis told investigators that before he moved in with Lori and her kids, she told him that Michael wasn't actually missing. Instead, she said it's not that he's missing, he's no longer walking this earth.
Yep. And Lori also allegedly told him that something terrible happened to Michael and there was a body on the property somewhere. Travis was actually the one who helped Lori pour that concrete for the patio on September 12th of 2016, a little over a year since Michael had been last seen. He even rented out a concrete mixer from Home Depot, and get this, he and Lori drew their initials into the slab before it dried.
Wow.
They even had their wedding, I'm doing air quotes, just feet away. But later, Travis would retract all of these statements and deny he ever said them. I told you, he is a crusader for Lori.
As soon as the cadaver dog was released onto Lori's property, it immediately started alerting to a dirt mound multiple times. And that's when they brought in a backhoe and excavators.
This was quite a scene. There were those tents put up to shield helicopters and drones or any planes from flying overhead and seeing anything, just in case evidence was uncovered. The ground-penetrating radar machine was being pushed along the perimeter of the land, close to where the canine alerted.
But this wasn't where the concrete slab was.
No, but that's the thing. They dug and they found nothing. Now, a body could have been there at one point, but it was clear that if it had been moved. The obvious place of interest was that slab, so they decided to break it apart. Now, you'd think if you were innocent, you would be cooperating, you would be watching the search unfold, you would be there if they needed your help, but not Lori. She was sitting in her truck in the driveway, and she was on the phone with her lawyer, doing everything she could to just stay out of the way completely, to separate herself from what was going on. This is your husband. They're looking for your husband under the ground, and you're just like, doo-doo-doo, doo-doo. That's so strange to me.
And once they started digging into the soil, it was chaos. Neighbors watched as investigators ran around shouting commands, and then suddenly everything stopped. Those closest to the dig site put their heads in their hands, and it was obvious that they found something.
It wasn't long before the sheriff made a public announcement. They confirmed they had located a human arm bone just 3 feet below the surface. Well, we have some good news and we have some bad news for them.
What's the good news?
There's a lot more to the story, but there is going to be a part 2, and I really do hope you come back and watch it. So please turn on your notifications, make sure you are subscribed, join my Instagram group for all the updates because you don't want to miss this, because I'm telling you, we worked so hard on this case to bring you all of the details. And the second part
is just as chilling.
It is. It's even more intense and unbelievable.
And also, please don't forget to check out our sponsor for today's video, Love and Pies.
Don't miss out on the fun. And my favorite part, the St. Patrick's Day special event is going on now. So click the link below or scan the QR code on the screen to download Love and Pies today. We'll see you in part 2. Bye.